Now this was the second image I discovered that really was rather shocking. There's another image I've got to show you. That's a little shocking too.
The exact moment the fatal
Now, I
bullet
want you
struck
to
the
look
president in the
closely
head.
in this area, right
Some
at the corner
believe
of
that
this
one
fence.
of these shadows may be an assassin standing behind the
Doesn't
fence.
seem like much right now, but
Lee Bowers, a railroad
one more time.
bullet struck the
Keep your
president
eyes
in the
right here
head.
at this.
Some believe that one of these
This part of
shadows
the fence.
may be an assassin standing behind.
What is it? Well, so what is this image again?
The exact moment the fatal bullet struck the president in the head.
Right here.
Some believe that one of these shadows may be an assassin standing behind the fence. Lee Bowers, a railroad employee who was working. Fatal bullet struck the president in the head. Some believe that one of these shadows may be an assassin standing behind the fence.
So now it didn't look like much.
Some believe that one of these shadows may be an assassin standing behind the fence.
As you can see, I was taking extreme close-ups of that many years ago.
One of these shadows.
This blob right here, that doesn't appear to be like much. Just, well, anyhow, I was taking a lot closer look here. Let's see if you see what I saw. I was beginning to see a face here. What really caught my eye was this upside down stripe here. I couldn't figure out what that could have been. So I was looking a little closer. So that's a little closer up of that image right here. As you can see, this is on the, this is picked up on television as they zoomed in on the Mormon photo. This was in a book, double page enlargement. So you get the gist of it. I was looking there, and let's take a here's some of the images I've extracted from that. How about a colorized version? One face there, one face here. How about a little larger view? And by the way, well, I gotta do it this way. I got all kinds of images here. Yes, there it is. Here's an independent close-up somebody did. I don't even know who it was, but this was a digitally enhanced version of the Mormon photo. They never even noticed this. I made a enlargement and I put it up here in the front. They were looking back here, back along here. And that may not I know it's hard to see. I didn't see it for several minutes. And once I started putting the pieces together, once the brain starts putting the pieces together, like I say, all I was looking at was this upside down V. Let's see, there should be something. Yes, that upside down V. And then I noticed there were a few others. There was this, what appears to be a circle here, just above that. And then I started putting the pieces together. You start seeing the faces. Once you start seeing the faces, understand this is the left arm. That's the History Channel. That's the close-up. Again, I'm losing my... Where is the color? There's the colorized. So there's definitely something very unusual there, to say the least. And when you put it all together, I can find that one again. Well, anyways, here's an even more extreme close-up. Let me see if I move that in a little. Now, this is very curious that at that distance, I mean, it's picking up this, and it does look like some writing much similar to this. That's a very long distance. But anyways, I can't get this to work. So anyhow, it's very curious that, if I can find that one. Where is it? It's very curious that you'd have two images like that found in this one photograph. And not only that, but an image like that also. Now, anyone who thinks of the lights and shadows, there's always a possibility of lights and shadows, but those are the damnedest lights and shadows I've ever seen. And as far as I'm concerned, this makes more sense than anything.
2 days after the assassination, Life magazine bought the infamous Zapruder film. Its moving images were not shown to the American public for 12 years.
The most obvious thing you extract from the film is that the head moves backward, and that suggests a shot from the right front.
It is unknown exactly what the film suggested to the members of the Warren Commission, since their report failed to even mention Kennedy's violent reaction to the headshot.
That's right, folks. The Warren Commission never even mentioned the headshot. Think about that. It was the Zapruder film that caused the second major investigation because of the Zapruder film. because of that headshot, and the Warren Commission never even commented on it. Just pathetic. And Abraham Zapruder, that's what he told the Warren Commission. He saw the president hit on the right side of the head. He thought perhaps the shots came from behind you. Well, yes. So that was his testimony to the Warren Commission. There was one little problem, though. He had a camera in front of his eyes. Let's continue.
Let me show you, to my best recollection, what the wound looked like to me that day in trauma room 1.
Before each doctor looked at the photos, he described the wounds he had seen back in 1963.
I could see the president's head wound quite well, and I was probably looking into a wound that was on the lateral or the side part of the head and the back part of the head.
It would be this portion of the head right here.
As I remember, it's like this, that there was a big wound, big deficit in his skull and the temporal parietal area.
Now, here's what the Warren Commission in their autopsy, they claim the autopsy showed. A small little wound in the back of the head. Yet on the Mormon photo, as we go in, take a closer look, I did many years ago. Something very unusual you see here. Here's somebody else that has examined this.
Inconsistencies within, and the pristine Mary Moorman photograph allowed me to go in and actually measure the wound optically without image processing. As we go into the wound and as we expand the wound and magnify it, you can see that the pixel elements, or each one of these little dots, is represented by dark squares or light squares. Now, if there were no wound in the rear of President Kennedy's head, all of the squares would be the basic reflective value or the basic shade of gray that his normal hair coloring would be on this day. Every time, in my years of experience with this, when there is a concave or convex area that is a deformation of the overall image, there is absolutely no question that the case is, as it goes darker under this situation, that this is going from an area on the top of President Kennedy's head down into an extremely deep hole, because the entrance wound that supported this exit wound was fired from the right frontal area of President Kennedy, and it exited through the rear. Instead of trying to find shooters or gunmen in the photograph.
Well, I have tried to find shooters in the photographs, and I found a few other things too. Now, before these images were found, the Warren Commission defenders had some little hope, some case to keep fending off reality and truth. But even with this truth before their very eyes, they're still trying to deny this fact. Now, is this the only image I've got of the back of the president's head? No. I also looked somewhere else. Thanks to Robert Grodin's enhancements of the Zapruder film, they were zoomed in some. I've zoomed in either further, and this is what I see. So we have two independent photos here, the Mormon photo and the Zapruder film, which both show this large wound in the back of the president's head. This is not words. This is hard evidence, hard photographic evidence of an exit wound in the back of the president's head. Now they can deny that. They could deny anything.
Large hole is at the front of the head.
See something else. This is just almost a personal a question. Are you pretty comfortable today with the notion that someone was firing at President Kennedy somewhere from the front?
Yes.
Are you equally comfortable, or are you not comfortable with the notion that there is forgery of some sort in the official documents of this?
I feel there probably is. I certainly could not be, held down to saying exactly how that is, or even approximately how it is, perhaps. But I feel that there has been some kind of attempt to cover up what was going on.
Continuing now with the JFK assassination, Part 5. The shots and the smoke that hasn't yet cleared.
In Dallas, with Lee Oswald, the man accused of assassinating President Kennedy, dead, the big question now is, what kind of man shot Lee Oswald, and why? We have in the studios of our affiliate station KRLD-TV here in Dallas, Bill DeMar, who is a nightclub MC, a comedian by profession. Bill worked in the nightclub owned by Jack Ruby.
So as far
Do you know
as
anything
timing
about
is...
Jack Rubenstein's political philosophies?
No, he never spoke about anything when we go for breakfast afterwards or anything. The only thing he talked about was business.
Did you ever hear him say anything about President Kennedy?
Never.
Do you know Lee Oswald? Have you ever seen him?
To my knowledge, if I recollect correctly, I saw him in the audience last week.
Lee Oswald in the audience at
Yes.
the club, at the
Yes.
Carousel
Yes.
Club, which is owned by Jack Rubenstein? Did Jack Rubenstein speak with Oswald, to your knowledge?
No, I didn't see him. I don't think Jack even knew he was in there.
You don't think Rubenstein knew that Oswald was in the club? It's such a strange coincidence that he would be in the club. Do you think it possible that Rubenstein knew him?
I don't think so. I don't know for sure.
Whatever popular opinion may be. As a nation and as individuals, it is worth reminding ourselves that many facts are known. Many questions have been answered beyond a reasonable doubt. The Warren Commission did make mistakes, but it also got a lot right. Despite all of the attacks, the Commission's main conclusions have so far passed the test of time. There is no proof and very little of any credible evidence of any conspiracy. And the facts, including much hard physical evidence, do indicate one man was the assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. Any contrary conclusions are speculation, based less on fact than imagination, often by people who divine things the ear cannot hear and the eyes cannot see. For CBS Reports, I'm Dan Rather.
25 years after John F. Kennedy was killed in Dallas, the mystery of his assassination and the fascination with that mystery both remain strong. In a CBS News New York Times poll taken a month ago, 2/3 of Americans did not believe Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and only 13% thought he did. And more than 60% thought there was an official cover-up to keep the public from learning the truth.
Sinister hue. On January 22nd, Texas Attorney General Wagner Carr phoned J. Lee Rankin and told him of an explosive rumor circulating in Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald had been an informant for the FBI. The commission was stunned.
They held an emergency meeting beginning after 5 on January 22nd. And at that point, they expressed just how terrified they were of the FBI. And they expressed their fear that if this was believed, nobody would ever believe that there hadn't been a conspiracy.
Rankin, if that was true, then you would have people think there was a conspiracy to accomplish this assassination that nothing the commission did could dissipate. Boggs, the implications of this are fantastic. I don't even like to see this being taken down. Dulles, yes, I think this record ought to be destroyed. Warren, except we said we would have records of our meetings.
In a position that was closer than anybody else, just from by happenstance, that allowed me to look for some period of time at the president's head wound, probably 18 to 20 inches away from it. Dr. Perry, who was enlarging the wound in the neck to do the tracheostomy, told me that the small wound in the neck looked like an entrance wound. The head wound that I saw was a very large wound in the right posterior part of the head.
Well, where did you think the shots had come from? What did you think?
But I think, even then, that I would have thought that this was certainly an exit wound in the back of the head, and that therefore the shot must have come from the front.
President
We have a report now which has to do with a news conference at Parkland Hospital, a report on the condition of Governor John Connally of Texas, so we switched to that.
The scene is the Parkland Hospital at Dallas, Texas. This is Dan Rather of CBS News. The man you are seeing here is the doctor who has been attending Texas Governor John Connally.
We know that the wound of entrance is alongside the shoulder blade here, that the wound of exit was here. We speculate that his arm perhaps was about in this position, and that it fractured his arm here, and then went on with him sitting into his left thigh. This is a matter of trying to reconstruct the trajectory of the bullet. He was shot from above, and he was in a sitting position. So we feel that this is all one bullet.
What you have been watching is the official briefing.
Prior to the tracheostomy performed by Dr. Perry, I observed in the lower third of the neck a small, rounded, well-demarcated entrance wound. This was obliterated by the tracheostomy in that Dr. Perry made the tracheostomy incision through the entrance wound. Different parts of the tissues were spread. He then made the incision into the trachea, and through the hole that had previously been made by the entrance of the bullet, the tracheostomy was put in place.
Radio reports from Dallas that afternoon mentioned the small round wound of entry in the front of the president's neck. They were heard by the late Dr. Robert Livingston, who was then scientific director of the National Institute for Mental Health.
The reports had been that the president had been shot from the rear, from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. And the evidence at hand from the Parkland Hospital doctors of a small, neat wound in the neck was contradictory to that, or at least complementary to that, in the sense that it required that there be a shot from in front, so that if he were shot from the rear, he was also being shot at the same time from in front. So I wanted to tell whoever was going to do the autopsy about that, and so I telephoned Bethesda Naval Hospital. The officer of the day I knew, and he put me quickly through to Dr. James Humes, who was going to head the autopsy team. He was very cordial, and we had a good conversation, brief. He had not heard about the neck wound. I told him that it was important because it was a wound of entrance, and I told him that it should be explored completely for its track and to find any bullet or fragments of bullets that would remain, and particularly emphasized that it had to be a frontal wound since there was no tearing of the tissues. He left the telephone momentarily and came back and said, "Dr. Livingston, I'm sorry, I can't continue this conversation. The FBI won't let me."
Humes later claimed he only learnt about that bullet wound after the autopsy from one of the Dallas doctors. He never examined it.
But after the body arrived at Bethesda Naval Hospital for the autopsy, many problems followed. The autopsy should have determined how the gunshots killed Kennedy and where the bullets entered and exited his body. Dr. James Humes, a Naval Hospital pathologist, not a forensic expert, was in charge. This was his first autopsy involving gunshot wounds. It resulted in many irregularities. He did not examine Kennedy's clothing to locate and confirm entry and exit wounds. He did not dissect the neck wound to trace the bullet's path through the body. He did not locate the wounds with reference to fixed body landmarks, and he apparently made errors of several inches in drawings locating the wounds. He did not properly examine the brain, which disappeared some years later and has not been found since. He didn't realize there was a bullet wound in the front of the neck until he contacted the Dallas doctors the following day. By then, the body had been removed and re-examination was impossible. And finally, he burned his original autopsy notes before they were made public. Compounding these problems, the autopsy descriptions of the wounds were substantially different from the way the doctors in Dallas described them, as David Lipton explains.
We have two groups of doctors seeing the body, which is evidence. Their observations are 6 hours apart. What did they see in each area of the body? In the area of the neck, President Kennedy suffered a wound in Dallas, which was described as an entry wound.
If Kennedy was shot from behind, the wound on the front of his neck had to be an exit wound. But that's not what Nurse Audrey Bell, on duty in the emergency room that day, recalls.
It looked small and round, like an entry wound, instead of larger, like an exit wound could often look.
The wound was about 5 millimeters or a 1/4 inch across, the size of a pencil, right at the throat, at the Adam's apple. That wound, Dr. Perry made a tracheotomy through.
Lipton claims he was told by the Dallas doctor who made the tracheotomy that his incision through the neck wound was smooth and less than half the width described by Dr. Humes, the autopsy doctor.
More significantly, he describes it as having widely gaping irregular edges. So the inconsistency here is that we have a widening of a wound, which in Dallas was thought to be a bullet's entry. At Bethesda, in the autopsy report, their conclusion is that this is the exit for a bullet, which entered from behind.
John Newman, a former analyst for the National Security Agency, has written extensively on Oswald's suspected intelligence connections.
There were 3 times that Oswald was interviewed by the FBI after his return from Russia in 1962. The one that's most interesting happened in the summer of 1963 when Oswald was arrested after engaging in fisticuffs right on the street corner with anti-Castro Cubans.
On August 9th, 1963, Oswald was arrested for disturbing the peace while distributing pro-Castro leaflets in New Orleans.
At this point, when he was arrested in his jail cell, he requested to be interviewed by an FBI agent in order to give them information on the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Now, if that isn't informing, I don't know what is.
During my
Darrow Tomlinson, a Parkland Hospital employee, reenacts how he found that bullet on a stretcher. The bullet was ballistically traced to Oswald's rifle. The Warren Commission concluded that it was the bullet that had wounded both men and that it had fallen out of Connolly's clothing onto his hospital stretcher.
The bullet was found here in this area, and not on that stretcher. That's the stretcher I took off the elevator. And it was
The stretcher he took off the elevator was Connolly's, so Tomlinson found the bullet on a different stretcher not connected to the case. This led critics to claim the bullet was planted, but the commission decided Tomlinson was mistaken.
It was there when I came up.
This is the bullet.
I had heard the noise. I'm looking at the president at the same time,
and he had pulled his hand toward his throat, and he fell over toward Jackie. There's a second shot, and now Governor Connolly is out of sight. The first two sort of came close together, but now we're riding and praying. And now we see the shot that hit the president in the head.
When I stated I felt like the second and third shots could not have been fired from the same rifle, they reminded me that I wasn't an expert.
Other witnesses heard shots from the rear. Photographs taken immediately after the killing showed a plainclothesman picking up a bullet.
The photographic evidence nor the movement of Kennedy's head prove he was struck from the grassy knoll. But much of the eyewitness testimony has never been explained, and there were ear witnesses who heard shots from several locations. Malcolm Summers.
I do think the first shot came from the school book depository up there. And then when the second one came, I did not know who all was shooting. I was thinking it was more than one person shooting. The first shot sounded just like a little pop. It sounded like a firecracker from a faraway distance. The other sounded real close, real close.
The surgeon who operated on Governor Connolly's chest wounds at Parkland Hospital was Dr. Robert Shaw.
The bullet struck lateral to the shoulder blade, stripped out approximately 10 centimeters of the fifth rib, driving fragments of the rib into his chest, went on and struck the radius bone of his lower arm at this point, and a small fragment of bullet entered the inner aspect of the lower left thigh. I have never seen a bullet that had caused as much bony damage as you found in the case of Governor Connolly remain as a pristine bullet.
Shadows. Critics said this open umbrella was a CIA weapon, which the man holding it used to fire a dart that paralyzed Kennedy in the neck. But a witness told Congress he was the man with the umbrella, and he had held it open to make a symbolic political statement.
Committee staff opened this umbrella so we can ascertain there's no dart gun in it.
They're, as far as I'm concerned, they're certainly welcome to.
Maybe you ought to turn that way with it.
Congress hired a group of experts to examine moments before Kennedy was first wounded. On the grassy knoll was the shape resembling a black dog. Photo analyst Bobby Hunt.
It is a black shape, apparently the head and shoulders of a man. In the region of what we'd call the face, there was some pink tones, purported to be flesh tones. And there was also an object which looked like a rifle with a flash suppressor or a nozzle on the rifle. But we concluded that this was a human being. That conclusion was derived from the enhancement and from some color spectrographic analysis we did on the visible flesh tones of the object. We did not conclude, however, that that was a rifle. We simply said it was consistent with a blur induced by the motion of the photograph.
Yes, I doubt severely that Governor Connolly's right wrist suffered a delayed reaction. In all reality, it was probably Kennedy that suffered a slight delayed reaction, so he was probably wounded. He was probably struck and then started reacting shortly after. Also here, it says Governor Connolly viewed the film and testified he was hit between 31 and frames 231 and 234. So he was pretty accurate, but that wasn't good enough for the Warren Commission. They knew that was still a big problem. 228, And also, as you can see, by his own testimony, he was in the process of turning straight forward again when he was hit, and he felt the impact. Exactly what the film shows.
The most famous film of the assassination is the Abraham Zapruder film showing the president being killed. One of the most amazing FBI documents is the one in which the Bureau refuses the film because it had no evidentiary value.
John Kennedy was obviously shot from the front. Everybody knows it. Virtually everybody in Dealey Plaza rushed to the grassy knoll, where they heard the sounds.
It came from a fence between the book depository and the railroad track.
Of Lee Harvey Oswald posed with the weapons he used to kill President Kennedy and Officer Tippit.
The head of CBS, Bill Paley, had been involved with the CIA from the time that it was the OSS. He'd always been a loyalist to him. And CBS invested their own credibility in this at the very, very beginning. At the moment of the release of the report, they were in the middle of a 2-hour special backing the report before it had ever been released. They had produced it, they had it ready, they had the interviews done.
And they took him down to Dealey Plaza and they said, okay, Mr. Nix, where did the shots come from? Where did you hear the shots come from?
From a fence between the book depository and the railroad track.
Cut, cut, cut. Now, Mr. Nix, where did you hear the shots come from?
It came from a fence.
Cut, cut, cut. They finally pulled him aside, this man did, and pulled him aside and said, now, Mr. Nix, what did the Warren Commission say? Where did they say these shots came from?
From the book depository.
And they said, that's right, and that's what we want you to say. And I remember riding home with him. He was so upset. I mean, he would hit the driving wheel, the steering wheel, and say, why? I mean, they try and make me look like I'm insane. And I know that's where they came from. I know that's where the shots came from.
The one that killed him also seemed to be inconsistent, both in terms of size and location. 6 of the Dallas doctors, including the neurosurgeon who pronounced Kennedy dead, said the cerebellum was visible through the hole in the skull. But according to the autopsy, the wound was not at the bottom and back of his head, where the cerebellum is located. In fact, in this drawing, we see only a small entry wound at this location. The drawing, based on an autopsy photo of the back of Kennedy's head, was made public by Congress and seems inconsistent with this drawing showing the size and location of what critics point out looks like a large exit wound. The drawing was approved by Dr. McClellan, one of the attending physicians in Dallas.
There was, 3 or 4 real close together, and it was, must have been the first one that shot him, because that's when that was the time I took the picture, and during that time, after I took the picture, and the shots were still being fired, I decided I'd better get on the ground.
Here's another extreme close-up of that image done by Gary Mack and Jack White.
At best, confusing. Dr. Robert McClelland saw the wounds firsthand at Parkland Hospital in Dallas.
The wounds are consistent, I think, not with the bullet having been fired from the 6th floor of the depository building from behind the president, but from somewhere around the grassy knoll or the triple underpass, somewhere in the front. Seeing that Zapruder film and noting the way the president was thrown backward violently to the left, and having seen that wound, I thought to myself, there's no way that could have come from the 6th floor behind him.
And what of the president's other wounds?
They claim that there was a small little wound here in the back of the head.
There was, 3 or 4.
I had been panning shots through here so that I could get whatever was going to come down the street. And I saw that it was the President of the United States. And as I was...
Now, Gordon Arnold, here's his story here. He claimed he was on leave, and he went to the parade to watch the president. He claims he was standing on the sidewalk between the fence and the wall, the grassy ball, with his camera filming the motorcade. He heard gunshots, reports, and he hit the dirt. Now also in the Jack White, Gary Mack close-ups of the Mormon photo. This is what they claim is Arnold hair to back up his story.
Panning down this direction, just as I got to about this position, a shot come right past my left ear. And that meant it would have had to come from this direction.
At that time, I turned to Gail and said, that's it, hit the ground.
And now, I've also found an image on that, on some of the photos of the GRASSY KNOLL. Also, Senator Yarborough was driving with Vice President Johnson in the motorcade, and as their car, there were two cars back, as they my eye was tracked to the right, and I saw the man jump about 10 feet like an old-time tackle in football, land against the wall. He also thought he smelled gunpowder near the grassy knoll and yelled, "My God, they've shot the president." And and Arnold says he hit the dirt. Now here's a close-up I've found. Between the fence, the side steps is her hair. And this is the image I found, and it looks to me like Gordon Arnold hit the dust. Hit the dirt. And if what he says is true, and that's him there, or the other image, that alone would prove conspiracy. Well,
And we turned and hit the ground and covered our children. But when the third shot was fired, I thought it came from directly behind towards the grassy knoll behind me. I based that primarily on the third shot from what I saw of the side of the president's head coming off and from the sound of the rifle, the report of the rifle.
I will always believe that the man that shot President Kennedy was standing somewhere in the picket fence area, and no one will ever convince me any differently.
It doesn't make sense to be hit from the rear and still have your face intact.
Well, I am very dead certain at least one shot, including the one that took the president's skull off, had to come from the right front. And I'll stand by that to my death, over my mother's grave.